give us free electricity. They will not grant a patent, and they keep us forced in fossil fuels and other ridiculous forms of power.
Huh. Now, my father built nuclear missiles for Martin Marietta. And I remember when the SALT II Treaty was signed, and he had to go back and take them all apart. But on top of that, my father was also in Project Blue Book and chased flying saucers. Now, he told me, once again, he was a worshipful master in the Freemasons, so who knows, but he told me absolutely flying saucers are real. And you had mentioned Reagan, and Reagan, one of his big things was to say, wouldn't it be great if we were attacked by an extraterrestrial force to unite humanity? How do you feel about this Project Blue Beam idea?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad to hear you say that also your father was a Mason, because they only let high-level Masons in on these projects. For example, I know a guy here locally who was, whose father had a Q clearance. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, he took his son, who is now this grown man that I'm referring to, out, and he said, I want you to look up here. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, here come these flying saucers flying real slow over their trailer. And so he obviously saw them. His father obviously knew about them, probably worked on them, probably involved in technology and building them. And the other man I knew, he was a colonel in the Air Force. He was involved in the Berlin airlift. I met him in a doctor's office one day. And he said that he went to the Roswell crash in 1947, and one of the first things he found was the remains of this saucer that was made from Pyrex, or Corning ware.
Really?
And it was surfaced inside and out with a glazed finish that would be able to reflect the light that was being used to generate the power to fly these crafts. So Corning, Corning and GE are two of the foremost military contractors to build these crafts. So yes, they exist, they're perfected, and this gentleman that I referred to previously, he said his father told him, the son, these crafts fly on what's called gyroscopic power.
Yeah, I'm going to have an architect talking about that next month. He's created the Levo-Gyre anti-gravity device. Mm-hmm. So that should be very interesting.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, hopefully it won't get blown up or killed. Now, okay, another thing that I've noticed a lot is the ritual nature of everything, such as the building of DC to particular stars, keeping things in 23 degrees of Virgo, and even like when we attacked Baghdad and they called it the shock and awe campaign. And I immediately equated that with the Shekinah of the Hebrews. Shekinah comes down and strikes Saddam Hussein, known as Nebuchadnezzar, using the mother of all bombs, which is the Moab. And I can't help but see ritual nature in our warfare.
Yeah, oh, no doubt. It's a crusade. Bush called it a crusade himself.
He did.
And oh, yes, George Bush called this a crusade. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
He said a slip of the tongue and said, well, I mean something else, but it was a crusade. And, of course, the Bush family and the bin Laden family have been working together for 25 years.
Right.
And, of course, bin Laden called it a crusade, too, and I don't really believe he's alive right now. But nonetheless, they've been working together, so the Jesuits are coordinating both sides of this crusade, controlling the Masonic leaders, the Masonic Islamic leaders, and the Masonic leaders of the West. So that just like they did in World War II, just like they did in World War I, so they're controlling both sides now so that they can ultimately control the outcome. But yes, it is very occultic, very ritualistic. In fact, the World Trade Center was built under the concept of Boaz and Jachin, the two pillars of Solomon's Temple in Freemasonry that are spoken of in Pike's Morals and Dogma. That's what they represented. So they're going to bring down those two pillars here in the West as a justification to ignite a crusade against the Muslims in the East. And by the way, the invasion of Afghanistan, the day it was invaded, I believe, was the same exact day for the Battle of Lepanto, when the Knights of Malta defeated the Ottoman Turks.
Wow. Okay. Well, now, all right, W is not in control of this country. I don't believe that it was a Bushian coup. You know, I think that Jeb Bush in Florida was a conspiracy within the conspiracy.
Yep.
Who's master of W?
The master of W is Edward Cardinal Egan, the Archbishop of New York City.
Huh.
He is the one that George Bush genuflects to and will do anything for. And I have quoted in my book, my third edition, that's 1,856 pages, that George Bush says he wants to implement the policies of Pope John Paul II. That simply means he wants to reduce this country to a vassal of the papacy, which involves suspending our Constitution and putting us under martial law and having a combination of fascism and Bolshevism as existed during the 20th century, because the Jesuits controlled both the Bolsheviks and the Nazis. So George Bush is controlled by the Jesuits out of Georgetown University. He has a whole lot of CFR members in his administration, but the Archbishop of New York controls the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Archbishop of New York is controlled or overseen by the Jesuits at Fordham University, particularly Jesuit Avery Cardinal Dulles, who is the nephew of the late John Foster Dulles, who is the son of the late John Foster Dulles, the Knight of Malta, who was the advisor or really the alter ego of President Eisenhower, and Alan Dulles is the uncle of John Foster, of Avery Dulles, the cardinal, who's a Jesuit.
Well, that routes back to the CIA and the FBI, right?
Absolutely. The CIA is controlled by the Knights of Malta. George J. Tenet was a Knight of Malta, head director of the CIA on the National Security Council, a carryover from the Clinton administration, because Clinton worked just as much for the Jesuits of Georgetown as George Bush. They're both for CFR, or at least Clinton was CFR, Bush's father was CFR. And so, as a result, George J. Tenet is the mastermind and overseer of that intelligence operation on 9/11 that brought down the World Trade Center, that demolished a portion of the Pentagon, and therefore they had their crusade. And by the way, when I was speaking at the Con in 2002, conspiracy conference out in California, one of the speakers there said that it was James Jesus Angleton, who I might add was a Knight of Malta, who received one of the highest awards that he could be given by the Knights of Malta. He advocated a war with Islam back in the early 70s. And this is now what they have. They have what they've been looking for 50 years, an open crusade against Islam, which they call a war on terror.
Right. Let's jump to Hollywood real quick.
Okay.
What do you think about Mel Gibson's Passion of Christ?
It's nothing biblical.
Yeah.
It's the typical Roman Catholic Christ. It's not the biblical Yeshua HaMashiach or the true Christ of the New Testament, the Reformation New Testament. The Textus Receptus is translated in the AV 1611 of the Geneva Bible. It is the Christ of Romanism, that is the Horus of Egypt, that is the Bacchus of Rome, that is the Nimrod of Babylon. It's the pagan Egyptian trinity in the person of Horus, and that is the Roman Christ that is depicted in Opus Dei, Mel Gibson's The Passion, who, by the way, was overseen and guided in his movie by Jesuit William J. Fulco.
All right. So his whole comment about the Jews, that was well planted, probably.
Oh, yeah. That was well planted, and I believe Gibson was merely repeating what he had been taught by his Jesuit mentors, specifically Mr. Fulco, because one of the things they are seeking to do in America, and they will succeed if people do not start being alerted to the fact it's all the papacy, they're going to blame the Jews for everything. And of course, there's a lot of papal court Jews that are Masonic working for the Archbishop of New York. There's probably 300 or 400 of them in the Council on Foreign Relations, and these are the labor Zionists. They're not revisionist Zionists, they are labor Zionists, and thus they are completely in the hand of the papacy. And as I show again in my book, that the Jesuits rule the government of Israel through these Masonic Jewish labor Zionists. And so they are going to blame the Jews of North America for this, which is going to result in a massive Jewish American Holocaust here in the United States, where 6 million Jews are going to be murdered by the Department of Homeland Security working in conjunction with Blackwater. And Blackwater is absolutely run by the Knights of Malta in the person of Joseph Schmitz, who's a Knight of Malta, and also Department of Homeland Security was created and overseen